Hello, everyone. You guys hear me? Is that cool? So, a while back, I spent almost a year touring the U.S. with a folk punk band, and I thought I would tell you guys a bit about it, because it's a really interesting community that a lot of people don't run into because, none of these bands are famous, really. Some are better known than others, but fame isn't really the point. So I thought I could give you a little insight into some groups that you wouldn't ordinarily run into. So the first question is, how did I end up with these people? And the short version goes, I went to see my friend's band at a local bar, and I met this guy, whose name is Ryan, and he said, "Do you want to join my band?" Apparently the fiddle player just quit, and he heard that I play violin. So at the time, I was playing in a death metal band, 2 funk bands, a gospel choir, and a sort of Middle Eastern indie rock fusion thing. So of course, like a reasonable person, I said, sure, I have time for one more band. A week later, I'm at the first practice, and they say, so, you ready to go on tour next month? And that's how I ended up traveling around with these guys. At first I said, no way, this is ridiculous, and then I said, oh, why don't I live a little? So I quit all my other bands, and I left my job, and I went on the road. So, I had a couple questions to start out with. Number one is, how do we get there? Meet Vanna White. So Vanna used to belong to another Boston-based band called Bad Ash. They're a horror punk band, and their bassist was a welder, so he welded in bunks and storage space. It was kind of like living out of a submarine. Biggest problem was it really didn't have heat, and 3 of the guys in the band are chain smokers, so the options were suffocate and freeze, or suffocate less and really, really freeze. I spent a lot of time doing this. The other problem was she broke down a lot, like really a lot. I think this time the culprit was, oh yeah, look at that. So we spent a lot of time and a lot of money trying to just keep her running. On Christmas morning, some woman on the highway did us the lovely favor of not checking before she turned and totaled our van. So the last 2 tours that we did were in a 1994 Jeep Grand Cherokee. 5 guys and all our stuff across the country. It was very cozy. So that had pros. And I feel like this really dispels one of the big myths about being a traveling musician. Most of my time was spent looking at that. It can be crushingly boring. No joke, 6 hours a day of that. So that's kind of rough. Where are we going to stay? Hello again, Vanna. It's so nice to see you. So Walmart policy is that you can park in their lots overnight and sleep there. And so we stayed at a lot of Walmart parking lots, some truck stops, things like that, which is fun. It's cozy, again. Also, pink leopard print, because why not? So once our van got totaled, obviously we couldn't all of us sleep in this Jeep Grand Cherokee, so we relied on the generosity of people that we met, and there were a lot of them, a couple motels, and mostly in Florida, a couple lawns, which is always fun. What are we going to eat? Honestly, I think this was the hardest part of being on tour. Most of the time, your options are, hello? That or that. Highway truck stops, not really a lot of nutritional content. This was by far the best option. It is the only place that you could get vegetables. It's a sight of a green pepper would just bring tears to my eyes. We did, however, rely on the generosity of strangers in many occasions. People would give us home-cooked meals. People would take us out for local delicacies. I think the best meal I had on tour was at Pleasant's Barbecue in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. They ran it out of their house. There was an open fire pit in the backyard, and they sold used tires on the front porch. So we got a spare for the van and a rack of ribs, and we're on our way, and it was great. How bad did it get? You're about to see the worst meal I have ever had in my life. This was in Oklahoma. Do not ever go to Oklahoma. It is awful. Yeah, spray cheese on cornflakes. It was dark. And, I mean, what are we going on tour for anyway? Well, the clear answer is we're just going to rock out as hard as possible. And we did do that a fair amount. However, it's sometimes harder than you'd think. Sold-out weekend shows in big cities are a lot of fun, but you also have to do Tuesday nights in small towns. I think the worst-attended show we played was in St. Louis, Missouri. We played to the sound guy and a cat. His name was Mr. Mittens, and he sat dead in the center of the room and stared at us the entire time. He loved it. Biggest fan. This sounds innocuous. We're going to go around playing music. It's a little sketchy living out of a van. Who's going to be opposed to that? These guys don't like touring bands. We're a very easy target on the highway. Very recognizable, beat-up van, beat-up trailer. And traveling musicians, they tend to think there's a high likelihood that they were going to find something. So 6 times in 6 different states, we got pulled over by state troopers and searched exhaustively. 4 of those times, they brought in the dogs. And if you don't believe me, here's the view from the back of the car that I had to wait in while the dogs went through everything I had. Not my favorite thing about touring. Makes me a little uncomfortable. So what I want to do at this point is give you a sort of lightning tour of where we went and some of the really amazing and strange people that we met and places we went. I'm going to play sort of fast and loose with the chronology here because some of these things didn't happen in quite this order. We did do 5 tours. So that's one thing. What I really find interesting about this is that you've got this community. It's really tight-knit, but it's scattered all across the country. So I want to sort of try to map out these relationships for you and show you how tightly connected this huge network really is. So as we go along, let me show you that. Our route looked something like that. You'll notice we didn't really make it around here. That's because there's nothing there. And if you want to get over here where there are people, you have to just drive through that. And so we never made it quite that way, but there's plenty to do in this area. So, first show in Burlington, Vermont was at a place called Higher Ground with a band called the World Inferno Friendship Society. They're kind of hard to pin down. They've been described as punk klezmer cabaret, and they have the most insanely devoted fan base I have ever met in my life. They call themselves the Infernites, and I Googled the term just to see what would come up, and I found this on Urban Dictionary. Note at the end, the next thing I remember, I was waking up on the beach at Coney Island with a black eye and my purse full of confetti. I happen to know the girl who wrote this, Nicola Nunsuch. While I knew her, she broke her back stage diving at a World Inferno concert and was at the next one the following weekend. That's dedication. So most of our fans were sort of borrowed from the Infernite group. We also played this show with this guy, whose name is HR. Now, a lifetime of addiction turned HR into a shambling, muttering mess of shell of his former self, but he used to be in a band called the Bad Brains, which some of you might have heard of. They're sort of the founding fathers of East Coast hardcore, and were so intense, they were legally banned from their home city of Washington because the police were afraid of their shows. This was in the early, mid-90s. They broke up a while ago, and HR is that now. So, I'm going to start this little map for you here. So you can see, fairly simple at this point. Nothing too crazy. So next we went down to New Paltz, New York, where we played with a band called 1600 Pound Pig. really friendly guys. And that night, we stayed with the bar owner and friendly local neighborhood maniac, Hickory Barbarossa, who lives in a cabin in the mountains, totally off the grid. He's rigged up running water, but he doesn't have electricity or heat, and his house is entirely decorated with empty liquor bottles and animal skulls. Like I said, you meet some strange people. So let's throw them on there. New York City, we found a really interesting cultural artifact. So ABC No Rio used to be a squat house. It's in the 90s, places where homeless punks would move into an abandoned building and sort of set up a commune. And in the early 2000s, the mayor of New York gave them the opportunity to get the building up to code and buy it from the city. So ABC No Rio went legit. They bought the building, they renovated the whole inside, and now it's sort of like a punk community center. They have a boarding house for travelers, they do like bike maintenance workshops and photography classes, and all ages matinee shows. This is the view from the back. It's a little nicer on the inside, but they kept the sort of grittiness of it. And there we played with a band called Wood Spider, who have also played with some of these other bands. Next, that night, we got an offer to stay at a place called Sea Squat. Now, in the early 2000s, when this offer came up, ABC No Rio went legit, and so did some other squat houses. Some of them just disappeared. Sea Squat turned down the offer and somehow survived, and it is the worst place I have ever been in my life. So we're talking like gaping holes in the walls, like needles in the corner, like people passed out in the hallways. My moral compass today is guided by the idea that bad people go to Sea Squat when they die. For reference, that stack of bottles in the middle picture, that's not the bar, that's the bathroom. I slept in the van that night. So, moving on. In Philadelphia, which is my home city, we played at the L Bar, which is a glorious dive I used to sneak into in high school to go see punk shows. This is really where I first got into this scene, and so this show meant a lot to me, even though this room has a capacity of like 26. We also played with one of my favorite bands, Mischief Brew, and this sort of gets us into another historical tangent. They're all tangled up with some punk history. So, Eric Peterson of Mischief Brew used to be in a band called The Orphans. The Orphans used to tour with a band called Leftover Crack. And the lead singer of Leftover Crack, Mr. Stizzacrack, used to be in a band called Choking Victim. Choking Victim were the original inhabitants of Sea Squat. And most of the members of Choking Victim and Leftover Crack still live there. So, this is where things start getting complicated, because all these bands know each other, and look, Choking Victim used to play shows with the Bad Brains. So we're getting kind of tangled up here. Went a little further south to Asheville, North Carolina. We played at a place called the Get Down. Asheville is this sort of little mountain hippie enclave where old punks go to retire. It's a wonderful, wonderful place. This woman, Amy, put us up for 3 days and fed us, and we played with her dog. Nice girl. In 1999, she looked like that. So people tend to mellow out over time, and a lot of like middle-aged punks end up in Asheville because it's just sort of like a friendly place for them. Went a little further south to Lake Worth, Florida. I don't remember the name of the place where we played, but these guys are some of the best people that I met on tour. They're called the Everymen, and they're sort of like hobo punk. Their frontman is this guy, how do I go back? Yeah? Yes. Captain Bobo, who is in charge of vocals and banjo and booking and songwriting and promotion and recording and, of course, fire breathing. And he actually knows Chestnut, our drummer, because they both used to just jump on cargo trains and ride around the country when they were teenagers. And so they met that way. Captain Bobo was on heroin at the time, but he got clean, and now he works at a rehab clinic doing music therapy. He also introduced us to some other bands to play shows with. Ascultura described themselves as 10-strong super punk ska and reggae rumba fury. And these guys, Filthy Still, are sort of like bluegrass punk. We played with them and the Everymen, and they'll sort of come back later. So, even more complicated. You can see how this is all still sort of on the East Coast. Cut across at this point, and skip a few towns. We end up in Texas, a place called Fort Worth. I don't remember the name of this place either. The sign was illegible. It had no windows. It was on the side of the highway. It was sort of like a biker bar. And it was a lot better than I expected it to be. We played with a band called The Fuss, and discovered, making friends, that their lead singer, pictured here, is a hairdresser at a fancy salon downtown. So the next day, we went over, and we all got haircuts. This is where I learned how to do the leopard print hair that I had on Halloween. Use celery. It's like a stamp. So that was a good deal. And The Fuss has played with a bunch of these people as well. We also played with a band called Thunderosa, who's very Texas-y. They're like mariachi punk. This was also the first show where I realized that we really had devoted fans. So, along with a bunch of other people, these two, Leanna and Danielle, drove 16 hours overnight from Phoenix, Arizona to see my band. And Caleb, with 2 other people, flew from New York City because she really wanted to see this show. And I think at that point I realized that this is actually important to a lot of people. And I've never done anything like that to see a band. That's dedication. Leanna also knit me a scarf last Christmas. It's warm. It's really nice. Texas is exactly what you expect. I took this photo in a Walmart. It was about 20 feet from the toy aisle. I mean, toy guns, real guns. And we stayed with our buddy Big Rob, who is an oil platform mechanic, enjoys big game hunting, and he took us out the next day to do the things that people do in Texas for fun. So yeah, we had a very, very Texas-y experience. It is exactly what you think it is. Next stop, Wichita, Kansas, which I just assumed was going to be the worst experience ever. It's middle of nowhere. I mean, Kansas, really? The bar was called Kirby's Beer Store. It was maybe a quarter the size of this room. There was barely enough room for us and the bartender. But we had 8 people there, and it seemed like it was a sold-out show. You couldn't put anybody else in there. This is the only picture I have of there, where you can see the stupendous haircut I got in Texas. And our opening act was a guy, I don't have a picture of him, but I found this picture online, and honest to God, he looked just like this. Hat and all. He was this old cowboy who lived down the street, and every Wednesday, no matter what kind of band was playing, he would play an hour of cowboy songs on his acoustic guitar to open up the night. So I asked him if I could sit in, and we played cowboy songs together for an hour. And after that, every time I made eye contact with him, he bought me whiskey. And that was the only night in all 5 tours that I did not help load out at the end of the night. Now, yeah. I have not been able to find him since. He's just sort of disappeared into the West. And that night, we stayed with a band called the Calamity Cubes, who are signed to the same record label as Filthy Still from Florida. Filthy Still called them up and said, they're coming through Kansas, can you give them a place to stay? I'm told that we played a house show with them that night. I don't recall this, but I'm told that we played the house show in their living room, and it was cut short because the tornado sirens went off. This is Kansas. And everybody else left to go home to hide in their basements, because that's what you do in a tornado, except this house didn't have a basement, and we didn't have anywhere else to go, so we kind of just sat there, crossed our fingers. That's fun. So, Calamity Cubes connect us to a bunch of these other people, and they're also on the same label as a band called the Goddamn Gallows, who we played with about 6 months later in Boston. You can see that this all sort of folds in on itself. And they played shows with 1600 Pound Pig, and nobody really played with the old school cowboy guy. Indianapolis. One of the strangest places I have ever been. This was another squat house. It was a Christian punk commune. And so they were all like very devout Christians who lived in this abandoned house with their children and gave each other face tattoos of cherubs with safety pins. And yeah. So we played this show. It was in one of the biggest storms I've ever seen in my life, like real Midwestern thunderstorm. And there was this massive crack in the corner that went from the ceiling to the floor. So there's water pouring in from this crack. We're on the far side of the room just praying it doesn't reach us as it like so slowly creeps across the floor. And there was one mosh pit for the adults, and then another little mini mosh pit for all the little kids who were there who had like construction-grade ear protection on. There were like 15 toddlers at this show. We played with this band, who were called Head Noise, and we discovered afterwards they described themselves as Christian sludge punk, and apparently they're like the celebrities of the Christian hardcore scene. They play all of these Christian punk festivals and are actually like very well known in their circle, which is a thing. Rob, the guitarist, I meant to take a screenshot from a video and I forgot, but he routinely takes out his Bible and reads from the book of Revelations during sets, like between songs instead of stage banter. He'll read from Revelations. And we also played with this band, Misunderstood. At the time, it was their third show ever. They were still in high school, and they were terrible. They were so bad. But one of the things I really love about the punk community is that the way you get good is by playing shows, and everybody's really supportive of young bands starting out. So we all got together, and we cheered for them. We demanded an encore, and they didn't have any more songs, so they played their first 3 songs over again. And we just like had a great time, and it was really fun because we just like brought this energy to it. 2 years later, I was in New Orleans, which is a long way from Indianapolis, and I see this on a recycle bin. Same band, 2 years later, miles and miles from home. So I like to think that I did something to sort of inspire the next generation. Like obviously, these kids got out of high school and took it on the road, and they seem to be doing all right. They can at least afford stickers, which is more than the Swagger and Growlers could do at the time. So there are a couple dead ends in here. Every Christian hardcore band ever. It's kind of cut off at the top. And Misunderstood, I have no idea who they played with. Probably part of a whole touring network that I don't even know about. So, last stop before we get back to Boston for the purposes of this. Albany, New York. Valentine's closed this week. And it's tragic to me because we played there every time on tour. I always had a fantastic time. Really nice people, fun club, great bands. But they're done. Yeah, this week. Like a couple of days ago. Yeah, Valentine's closed. They had their last show last Saturday. Tragic. We played with a band called Bent Left, who we actually played with in St. Louis, Missouri, to a cat. That's these guys. And they were also on tour. They happened to cross paths with us in Albany, New York, so we played a show with them. And we also played with Lenny Lashley, who was performing as Lenny Lashley's Gang of One. And he's one of these guys, he seems to have been around since the dawn of time, and he's like, played with everyone in every city. He's like a fixture of the touring scene. He used to be in a fairly successful band called Darkbuster, and then he joined a band called the Street Dogs. And between these groups, he's been all over the place. So this kind of ties in all the other pieces from the East Coast. You can see it gets a little bare in the Midwest just because it's a little harder to get places. But this really crisscrosses our diagram nicely. And this just sort of goes on forever. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of bands that we played with personally, who I did not mention here, dozens and dozens of venues and different towns and people who put us up and promoters who set up shows. And, I mean, most of these bands are still touring. A lot of these bands are probably playing shows tonight in any one of these places or any other places. And, I mean, there are new bands starting up every day. But my point is that all these people, like, they actually know each other face to face. I met people in Texas who knew my friends from Boston, who knew the people who gave me a place to stay in middle of nowhere, Louisiana. these people actually care about each other, and they're very closely connected, even though they're scattered all over the country. And I think that's really fascinating. I think it's sort of hard to find people who are this far apart, who are friends not over the internet, not even over the phone, but face to face, see each other every couple months because they're just always sort of shuffling around doing each other favors. And that's about what I got. Thanks a lot.
Questions for Ethan? One, what did your parents have to say about all this?
My parents thought that it was a terrible, terrible idea, and I said duly noted, and they said okay. I feel like I talked to them about it and sort of justified it, like, I've spent a year working, I've got enough money saved up that I can do this and not be broke. One of the reasons I stopped was that I sort of ran out of money. Don't do this for money, kids. There's no money in this. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I sort of did it in as responsible a way as I could, considering what it is.
Okay, and when was it again? When did you do your tour?
This was, the first tour we did was like late August, early September of 2011, and I toured with them through July of the next year.
So I was just wondering what it was like to spend that much time with the same group of people and sleeping in the same place.
I mean, that is another reason why I stopped touring, is you start to drive each other crazy. Ryan, the accordion player, is the only one who I'm still like really friends with. You know, like he's in my wedding party and like we're really close. But the others, I mean, Chestnut, our drummer, is kind of a maniac. So he got to be like, really unstable and kind of dangerous, and so he actually got us kicked out of a historic landmark in Chicago. So yeah, and then you just sort of start to grange. It's like, imagine a roommate, but you both have to be in your room all the time, and your room is like 3 feet across. So yeah, that definitely starts to grind on you. But in a way, like, especially once you've been on tour for a few weeks, you just kind of accept it as a reality of life. And like, at any given moment, these 4 people are in front of you. And that's just how it is. So it's not like every minute I'm like, oh God, I gotta get away from these people. And it's like, this is my world. Yeah.